What's up everybody, hello and welcome to Not Your Average Meta, an MTG Commander channel dedicated to bringing you decks and commanders you wouldn't normally find in your average meta. This week's video is brought to you by our channel sponsors International MTG on TCG Player, as well as Martin from the Hobby Horse. We've also started a new Discord channel which is free to join, so come hang out with us. Link in the description of this video. On this week's episode of Not Your Average Meta, we're bringing you another fun game featuring an appearance of a wild Gavin at the Hobby Horse. This week's game features Ryan playing a new Outlaw of Thunder Junction legend, Obeka Splitter of Seconds, Foil returning playing his Big Blue Boys being led by Thryx the Sudden Storm, Falgro playing his favorite Rule 0 commander Witch-Maw Nephilim, and Gavin making a shocking guest appearance playing Ojer Axonil, Deepest Might. Now that we were fighters, let's step into the Thunderdome and see which deck will come out on top. Turn 1, Gavin plays a mountain while Ryan plays a mountain of his own. Foil plays an island for turn and then pays 1 for a turn 1 Mystic Remora. Fog plays an Opal Palace for turn, paying 1 for a Civic Saber, before passing his turn to Gavin, who draws for turn and plays another mountain. He then casts an Arcane Signet, which has Foil drawing a card off his Remora. Ryan plays a Swamp for turn before tapping out and casting a Fellwar Stone. Foil draws another card off his Remora before going to his upkeep, paying to keep the Remora on the field. He then draws for turn and plays a tapped Glasspool Shore before passing. Fog plays a Command Tower for turn and then pays 1 for a Hedge Witch's Mask, which has Foil drawing another card. Gavin plays another Mount for turn and then pays 2 for a Thermo Alchemist. Ryan plays a second Mount for turn before tapping out in order to cast his commander Obeka. Foil lets the Remora go to his graveyard on his upkeep and then draws for turn. He then plays another island before tapping out and casting his favorite Midnight Clock. Fog plays an Ancient Den for turn and then pays 3 to cast Glunch the Bestower. He then goes to his instep, having Gavin put 2 counters on his creature while he allows Foil to draw a card and he creates himself 2 treasure tokens. Gavin draws for turn and then pays 4 for Chandra Torch of Defiance. He then upticks her to add 2 mana to his mana pool before casting a Mind Stone. Ryan plays a second Swamp for turn and then pays 5 for a Bonehorde Dracosaur. He then goes to combat, swinging his commander over Gavin for 2 commander damage, which then has him getting 2 additional upkeeps. He then exiles 2 cards from the top of his library because of his Dracosaur on his first upkeep, before he then does it a second time. This then has him gaining 4 treasure tokens, which he then uses to help him cast a Tavern Brawler from exile. Foil puts a 4th counter on his clock on his upkeep before drawing for turn and playing an island. He then casts his own Mind Stone and passes the turn to Fog, who plays a Swamp for turn. Fog then uses his 2 treasures in order to help him cast his commander, Witch-Maw Nephilim. He then pays to equip his commander with his saber before it goes to his instep. Fog then puts 2 counters on his commander, has Foil draw a card, and lets Ryan create 2 treasure tokens. On his instep, Gavin taps his creature to do 1 damage each of his opponents before drawing for turn. He then taps out in order to cast his commander Ojer Axonil, which then gets countered by Ryan with the counterspell. In response to that, Foil casts an Into the Royal in order to bounce Ryan's commander back to his hand, much to Fog's delight. After this, Gavin upticks Chandra once again in order to help cast a Spell Shock. On his upkeep, Ryan exiles the top 2 cards of his library, which has him creating a 3/1 Dinosaur token. He then draws for turn before playing a mountain and recasting his commander a second time. This then has him losing 2 life before he then pays to cast a Ring of Zax after losing 2 more life. Finally, he casts an Arcane Signet, losing 2 more life before he goes to combat, swinging his Dinosaur over at Foil, which has him dealing 5 damage. On his upkeep, Foil adds more counters to his clock and then draws for turn. He then taps out and casts a Guardian of Tazim, after which he plays his land for turn, which has him tapping down Ryan's commander. Foil then remembers to lose his 2 life and passes the Fog, who plays the Plains for turn. Fog then pays to cast a Solemn Simulacrum, which has him losing 2 life and going into his library to go get a Force to put into play tapped. This then has him adding 2 counters to his commander before he then goes to his instep. Glunch then triggers and he has Foil putting 2 counters on his creature while he has Gavin draw a card and he creates 2 treasure tokens. On his instep, Gavin taps his creature to deal 1 damage each of his opponents before drawing for turn. He then plays another Mount for turn before he upticks Chandra once again in order to help him cast his commander a second time. He then loses 2 life before casting a pair of Lightning Greaves, which has him losing 2 more life. Gavin then equips the Greaves to his commander and passes. On his upkeep, Ryan exiles the top card of his library to the Tavern Brawler before exiling 2 more cards from the top of his library. He then draws for turn and pays to suspend a Thesis, which Gavin mistakenly has him lose 4 life for. He then plays his land from exile before paying to cast a Ring of Evos Isle, which has him losing 4 life. He then pays to equip the ring to his commander before passing his turn to foil. On his upkeep, Foil's clock goes off, which has him shuffling his hand and graveyard into his library before drawing a fresh 7 cards. This then has him drawing for turn before he pays 3 and casts a Show and Tell, which has him losing 2 life. This then has each of the players putting into play an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land card from their hand. He then plays an island for turn, once again targeting Obeka, and in response, Ryan pays to give his commander hexproof. Fog draws for turn and then pays to cast a Veteran Explorer, which has him losing 4 life, but also puts 2 counters on his commander. He then also pays to equip his commander with the Hedgewitch's Mask before he goes to combat, deciding to swing his commander over Gavin. Gavin then decides to take the 12 commander damage. In his second main phase, Fog casts Take, which has him losing 4 life but puts 2 more counters on his commander. He then removes all 8 counters off of his commander and draws 8 cards. He then plays a Forest as his land for turn before paying 2 in order to cast a Cankerbloom, losing 4 more life. This then puts 2 counters on his commander and he goes to his end step, which has Ryan drawing a card, Foil putting 2 counters on his creature, and Fog creating 2 treasure tokens. On his end step, Gavin taps his creature to deal 4 damage to each of his opponents before drawing for turn. He then taps both of his creatures this time to deal 8 damage to each of his opponents. After this, he then casts a Valakut Awakening in order to discard his hand and draw some cards, which also untaps both of his creatures. He then bottoms his hand and draws 4 more cards before he goes to tap his creatures once again. Fog then responds to this by cracking his Cankerbloom to destroy the Lightning Greaves, so he can then cast a Geist Wave in order to bounce his commander back to his hand. This still has Fog taking 6 damage while Foil and Ryan both take 2. Gavin then casts Seize the Spoils, which has him discarding a card and drawing 2 cards while he creates a treasure token. This then has him untapping both of his creatures before he once again upticks Chandra and uses the rest of his mana to help him recast his commander a 3rd time. This then has him once again tapping both of his creatures, this time dealing 8 damage to each of his opponents, which takes Fog out of the game while Ryan goes down to 2 life. On his upkeep, Ryan exiles a card to the Tavern Brawler before he then exiles 2 more cards to the Dracosaur. He then draws and plays a Mountain for turn before going to combat, swinging his commander over Gavin. He then also decides he might as well swing his dragon over Gavin, which has Gavin going down to 3 life while he takes 10 more commander damage. This then gives him 10 additional upkeeps, which has him exiling a bunch of cards to his Dracosaur, and in the midst of exiling all of his cards, he's taking counters off of the Thesis. He then realizes no matter what, he's going to get taken out of the game by his own Thesis once it gets cast, so he scoops the game up and passes his turn. Foil untaps and draws for turn before playing an island, which has him tapping down Gavin's 1 creature. He then decides to just go straight to combat, which has him swinging out at Gavin, winning him the game. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe in order to see more games and decks you wouldn't normally see in your average meta.